Okay, good morning. All right, so on tap for today, we are going to take a couple of minutes to explore the row that Hale Smith uses in Evocation. A lot of you have done worksheet 10, so you've kind of already done that to some degree. We are actually going to just use worksheet 10 to talk through that. And then I'm going to send you off into breakout rooms to do a little bit of row analysis on this piece. If my last class was any indication, everyone seemed to be absolutely exhausted, and the class moved at about 50% of the speed that I thought it was going to. So there's a good chance we will not get through a ton today as far as the length of the piece, and that's totally fine. I'm happy to just do a really good analysis of even just the first page. And then we'll wrap up as a large group. So let's go ahead, and if you have worksheet 10 handy, it actually might be helpful for the whole class because it makes the row counting process a little easier to have the rows in front of you. But I'm going to jump over to worksheet 10 as well. So let's take a look at these row forms. Now, the entire piece utilizes just 4 different rows. And not just that, but the 4 rows that Smith chooses have a couple of features that make them a really great choice for what he's going for with this piece. And the first feature is that every single one of these 4 rows is bounded by the same 2 notes. So in some order, there is an E flat and an A as the first and last pitches of the row. Now, that becomes especially fancy for you guys as you're going through the piece for the first time looking for rows, because when you're doing that kind of Where's Waldo game, you know that when you see an A or an E flat, that's going to mean that you're at the beginning or an end of a row, because those are the only places that those 2 pitches happen. So if it's business as usual and there's nothing weird going on, you could assume that an A or an E flat, sometimes you'll see it as a D sharp in this piece. If you see one of those 2 pitches, that means that you're at a boundary of row forms, and that is really helpful in expediting the searching process. Now, what this also means is that because then all of the rows share these notes. So for example, P0 starts on A, RI0 ends on A, you can imagine then that it's very easy for Smith to then use almost like a pivot note between rows. So he can bound rows with the same note, and an A or an E flat can behave as both the first note of one row and the last note of the row before it. So you might see that kind of sharing of notes as you go through this piece. So that's interesting feature number 1. Interesting feature number 2 is that all 4 of these rows also contain a single dyad that always happens in one order or another. And that is the B and the F sharp. So all 4 of these rows have a B and an F sharp together. Sometimes they're in the reverse order, like that one, but they all have this dyad. Now, in class on Wednesday, there were a couple of people who mentioned the F sharp specifically as being kind of potentially important, and the B, some other people mentioned that one. So keep that in mind as you're looking at the piece today, because that B to F sharp dyad actually does emerge as a kind of an anchor point. And it's later in the piece, so we might not even get to it, but it's something to keep in mind regardless. And last but not least, I asked about this on the on worksheet 10, this idea that the 12-note row is embedded with 3 instances of the same trichord. And that trichord is in 027. Now, I talked about that as being a subset of the circle of fifths. I'm just going to kind of flesh that idea out here on a clock face. So I'm going to arbitrarily start on the pitch C. And I'm going to go through the circle of fifths with it. So C up a perfect fifth will give me G. and G up another perfect fifth will give me D. Now, if I take that and I find a set class label for this trichord, it will indeed give me O27. So the O27 is like if you had a circle of fifths in front of you and chose any three random notes that are next to each other and plucked them out, that would be an O27 every single time. So this particular trichord then has a lot of kind of harmonic and melodic implications because you can rotate through perfect fifths or perfect fourths with it. And it gives you kind of a very tonal kind of open sound. Now, every single one of these rows has three instances of it. And the first two in P0 are really easy to see. So you've got this descending P4 pattern here and a descending P4 pattern here. The other one is not as clearly notated, and that's because it's packed a little bit differently. So that last trichord, the A flat, D flat, E flat, it's still an O27. It's just not in the sequence of fourths like these first two trichords are. And the way that you can think of it, there are a bunch of ways to kind of hunt for these. I actually was thinking about it in terms of key signatures. So if you think about consecutive key signatures, so 0 sharps and flats, 1 flat, 1 sharp, you know those are all next to each other on the circle of fifths. You've got 4 sharps, 5 sharps, 6 sharps, and then with this one you have 4 flats, 5 flats, and 3 flats. So they're out of order, but they're still consecutive. And every single one of these rows has 3 instances of an O27. So I'm going to mark them off really quickly just so we have them. And then going into then your analysis that you're about to go through, these O27s become something that we can consider both in a linear way and also in a harmonic way. How are they presented to us from left to right, and how are they presented to us vertically? Okay, so what I would like us to do today then is I'm going to send you off into breakout rooms. Your Google Doc is here. So I have some prompts in the Google Doc that sort of guide you to certain spots to find particular rows in those spots. Like I said, if my other class is any indication, that's actually going to be more than enough. I intended for us to get a little further in the piece, but if that happens, cool. If not, totally okay. I realized that doing something this like mind melting the day your capstones were due was maybe not the best idea. But I also really wanted to spend 2 days on this piece, so I didn't really have any other options timing wise. So let's just kind of do what you can. I would rather a really deep look at one page than a crappy snorkel view of all 3 pages. So let's do what we can. Dive in, have fun. I'm going to open up the breakout rooms for you. Room 1 will be our quiet room. Oh, sorry. I did not give the option to choose. Hold on. All right, now you can go. I'll come retrieve you in about 20 minutes. Okay, so you guys, you seem to be also a little bit exhausted. So I'm happy to just kind of dive through the first page and give you some ideas for discussion response pathways. The prompt is up there on Blackboard, but I make those prompts ahead of time so that they're like up and available for you as soon as class ends on Friday. But I also never have any idea really the direction that classes are going to take. So sometimes something happens in class and I'm like, oh, that's a great topic for the discussion response. But the prompt is already up there. So I will give you some additional ideas as we're talking through this. So I took what was going on in the doc and kind of put it on the score here. And hopefully it's clear-ish. So you can see I have a little key up top for the row forms that exist on the first page. So P0 is in green, and so we get three really nice, clean presentations of P0. And going from one to the other, the first one takes the whole first system. We get a kind of temporally condensed version of it in its second presentation. And then someone also noted that registrally, from first to second to third, we're just kind of walking down the keyboard. So sort of deepening the register and also engaging more and more verticality. So the first presentation of P0 is very linear. And then we start to kind of engage more and more vertical sonorities as we go through the second and third presentations. Now, at the end of the third presentation, we see our first instance of Hale Smith exploiting those particular row forms that are all framed by the same A and E flat dyad. So this E flat is shared between the last note of P0 and the first note of RI0. Now, I answered this question in the doc. Yeah, so Aviva is asking a really good question in the chat, and this came up in the Google Doc too. So say you're looking at this and you say, okay, this E flat is shared between the two rows, and then the next pitch is B flat. And then you look at the four row forms, and there is not a single row form that goes from E flat to B flat as the first two notes. We have this option and this option. So neither of those fit, right? So this is a little bit tricky, but we have this F that is kind of hanging out underneath. And Smith uses that tied note as a way to sort of fudge the order of the pitches. Yes, the attack point of the F was here, but he's really using it as a fluid location. So not only is the F enacted in P0 in its normal spot, but he also draws upon it to act as the second pitch of RI0. So we go from E flat to F and then back up to the B flat. And then from there, you're pretty much linear, smooth sailing. You get your B, F sharp, C, C, E, and then you have this verticality that gives you the last four notes. So yeah, so to talk a little bit more to Aviva's question, order is the first thing to go when we're talking about like strict serialism. Kind of fudging the order with either repetition or held notes like that is really common to give the composer a little bit more flexibility. And we see that here, and it does make for a tricky location of that row. Now, someone else asked in the doc about what's going on here, because it seems like we finish up RI0 here, and with that E flat and F, it seems like we're starting a new presentation of the row. But then we get a repetition, in effect, of this measure again. So that vertical sonority is exactly the same. But most of this sonority is from the end of RI0, not the beginning. So there's this kind of like I call it a hiccup or like a stutter in the row where we start it and then we kind of like reboot it and go back to this sonority one more time. And then from here, again, now it's really smooth sailing. We get the B flat here, and then we proceed through the rest of the row with no problems. But again, kind of playing with temporality and order a little bit there. Another couple of ideas that came from the doc. So we finish up RI0. We share the A to give us one more P0. We share this D sharp. And this was the interesting one that I asked you guys about in the doc. So we get this presentation of P6. And it's our first introduction to P6. And as we see it, it proceeds pretty clearly. But when we get this interjection of the C and the D, those are not where they should be. Or maybe more specifically, we're missing the last two notes of P6. So we've got 10 pitches of this row in really clean linear form, and we're expecting a G and an A at the end of the row. We don't get that at all. Instead, we get this C to D dyad. Now, this is actually a moment, measure 14 is a moment that almost all of you mentioned in the Google Doc on Wednesday as something that stuck out to you for various reasons. Huge registral shift, right? Very pianissimo staccato kind of plunk at the keyboard, and also the rest here. A lot of you mentioned that this is the first like big chunk of silence in the piece. So there's a lot of things that draw our attention to this moment. And now we also realize that those two pitches are actually breaking from our row presentation on top of everything else. And one group made a really great observation that the C and the D, so intervallically, C natural and D natural have the same intervallic relationship to one another that the G and the A would have had, right? So we could very easily just transpose this thing and get the same intervallic content, but with G and A. But one group did mention that those pitches, the C and the D, are actually interval class 6 away from the G and the A. So I asked in the doc about kind of this exploitation of IC5. And you guys, someone mentioned that C and D are IC5 away from G and A. So kind of a very like deeply embedded relationship to that I think is really, really cool and interesting. Okay, in the last 2 minutes, I am going to switch us over to my score so that you can get a really quick visual, and I'll put it on Blackboard too, of kind of a large scale view of this piece. So this is moderately complete. I still have some stuff I would like to do with it, but you can see there's a key up here. The colors are different from today, sorry. But I'm just going to scan through so you can get a sense of the row shifts as this piece goes on. So you can see big pockets of P0, Ri0. We switch to P6 here, and we get this block of P6. And then this chunk of R6. And then this is our A prime right here, right? So we talked about this on Wednesday, this being our A prime. We return to P0, but now we're trading it off with another row. And then we get these incomplete P6s to close out. So this, I like the highlighting because it gives you a really clear visual of exactly kind of what's panning out with the row forms. So one thing that might be good fodder for a discussion response, we all agreed on an A prime spot on Wednesday. We have yet to discuss or really solidify where the B section might start. And there are a couple of good options for that. So that's a great discussion topic to take on for your discussion response. Where is the B section and why do you think that? You can use row forms to influence your discussion. You can use a ton of other things, though. Things like this occurrence that a lot of people mentioned seemed like a formal marker to them. So there's a lot in there that you could dive into in terms of formal discussions. Other thoughts, I talked a little bit in the Google Doc. These triplet figures, when they come around, they tend to be... Those complete triplets tend to be reserved for specific set classes, and they emerge as these motives throughout the entire piece. So great discussion topic would be following them around, just kind of tracking them through the entire piece to see how they develop. There's a great article on this piece that talks about motive in the kind of linear sense. So the triplet motive and also the quintuplet motive. And it's a great sort of thread to take for a discussion. Okay, discussion response due by class time on Monday. There is a video lecture for Monday. It's quite short and there's no notation required. It's really just me giving you the lowdown on what indeterminacy is. For Wednesday, there is no free write. The piece we're dealing with next week is long. It's like 40 minutes. So it's not appropriate for me to ask you to listen to it twice and write about it for 3 points. So what we're going to do instead is on Wednesday, we are going to all listen to it together and attempt to do a kind of real time response and analysis to it, either through Discord or the chat or a Google Doc. I've obviously never had the opportunity to do this because I've never taught remotely in this way. So this is either going to be really cool or it's going to be a dumpster fire and probably nowhere in between. So that's what we have on tap for Wednesday. So there's no free write. There is a worksheet on the piece, though, that just involves you looking at the score and pontificating on it. So I will have all of your stuff up on Blackboard by the middle of the day. If you have questions, let me know. I will get to your capstones this weekend and into Monday. If you have questions, I'm available. Otherwise, you all have a wonderful weekend, and I will see you on Wednesday.
Thank you.
You're
Yeah.
welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome.